What are the risks in a private placement? This is one of the most important jobs of the attorney is documenting the risks in the deal. And there are many, many different kinds of risks that you need to catalog. You need to share with the investors all the things that go wrong so that they can't come back and say, well, gee, if I would have known about that particular thing, I never would have invested. So you really want to be careful that you get all this stuff cataloged and organized properly. And as long as you do that, then you're going to have a lot of protection in the future, which your attorney, which I am not, will provide to you. Now, what are the big risks? Well, they fall into many categories. So you have business risks, you have environmental risks, you have tax risks, you have judicial, legal risk, you have all these different kinds of things. And they're all different. A lot of them are boilerplate types of risks. But here's what we do. We've got about 40 or 50 different risks in our private placement documents. And we talk about, the interest rate could change in the marketplace. And if it does, we could lose our investment. We talk about how inflation could soar and we wouldn't have protection, or inflation could decrease, or the tax law could change, or we could be, challenged by the IRS as to our legal status. Maybe we're not treated as a partnership. Maybe they want to treat us as a corporation. I mean, there's all these different things. And then we always ask the promoters when we're helping them to build their structures, what are some unique things about your part of the country or your area that we may not be familiar with? Now, we don't ask anybody to write it down. That's the attorney's job, is to write it down, research it. But they might say, listen, in Florida, we have these sand piles that collapse, and so that happens. We might have weather in other parts of the country. You might have tornadoes, and these are general things that do not go in all documents. So, for example, there could be just weather. If you're buying an environmental type of deal, let's say, for example, you're buying a gas station, there could be some contamination. So we want to know something about the kinds of deals. So you have to let your attorney know exactly what it is that could go wrong in your particular deal. Now let's talk about what these risks are, because these risks are very significant. The world is fraught with risk. I mean, just in general, there are a lot of risks in the world. And you, for example, could, listen, you go out in the morning and get in your car, you drive down the street. That's a significant risk. And you could have all sorts of problems when you do that. When you go on an escalator, elevator, when you go to the supermarket. I mean, there are things that could go wrong in every part of your life. And you don't necessarily stay in your house under the covers in your bed all day long because there are risks in the world. And it's the same thing with investors. They're not necessarily going to say no to your deal because interest rates might change, or because inflation could change, or because the IRS could decline your status as a partnership. But what's going to happen is at least they're advised, and they can't come back and say, well, gee, that was a really important one to me, and if I'd have known about it, I wouldn't have done this deal, because that allows them to, charge back and give all kinds of problems that you don't want to have. So you want to be very careful. You want to be very forthcoming. Anything that you know about the deal, if the deal's got weak bones, you need to share that. Whatever the problem is, you need to put it out there. Do not put half the information, put all the information. Disclose everything to the attorney. Let the attorney put it out there. That's the attorney's job, is to share the information in a way that is appropriate for the investors so that they get what they know, what they need. And that's your job, is to share that information. So that all being said, those are kind of generic risks. What's the real risk of private placement? In my opinion, the really big risk that investors take is not so much the economic, the hazards, all the other stuff. Those are all real. But if I was to tell investors, if I was to pick one single thing that is really a big risk, a real issue with these deals, is that there's not a lot of liquidity. And if they need liquidity, there's no guarantee they can have it. Or if they need it, maybe they can get some liquidity because somebody will buy their share, but they may not buy it at a fair price. They may not buy it at their entry price, what they put in. They could take a discount. So the liquidity is really the big issue. I mean, you can always have failures in investments, and that can go wrong, and that happens in life. But what really is significant is that if somebody needs their cash back, they're not getting it. So you really have to tee people up properly so that they don't have an expectation that they're going to be able to get their cash back anytime soon, because that's just not realistic. And as long as you get those things organized, and as long as you get people on the right page and they're really thinking, they understand kind of what the issues are, and everybody's expectations are in line, and that's really what this whole exercise about risk disclosure is about making sure that everybody's expectations are kind of lined up properly. then you should be successful with your transaction and with your investor relations. And that's what makes this a great business. So just go out and stake your claim.